This is really, from the very beginning, what I said is it's a bad, good idea because of the symbol. And I knew who is behind the project and who is supporting that. I can understand that many religious, communities are supporting and representatives. But I think that this very specific project, for me in itself, is problematic. And I think it's not helping the understanding of Muslims about their rights. And I want to make it clear, I'm not saying that we don't have to struggle for our rights. I'm saying exactly the opposite, that sometimes you have to take into account the psychology, the collective psychology, and what is happening around you, to take things into account and to push for the real life of Muslims at the grassroots level and at the local levels. And I think that this is what I'm saying mainly. And I would say that the Muslims should be very, very cautious not to be instrumentalized by pushing and supporting some projects, and they don't know what is going out of it. It's going out of these projects, these very projects. And this is where I'm quite cautious with the whole issue. And yes, people could be surprised, but I think that they have maybe to think in a deeper way about the strategy. My point is never to be in the defensive, to apologize for being Muslims, but to understand that we are struggling for our rights, but we understand sometimes the sensitivities around us, and sometimes also how a society could build leadership from within by putting some pressure. Let us talk about this as well from within the community.
It's interesting, just as Professor Ramadan was banned from the United States, Mustafa Bayoumi, your book, How Does It Feel to Be a Problem, wasn't a problem when it was first put on a list to be required reading at Brooklyn College. But this year, it became one.
Yes, my book was released 2 years ago, and it, without incident, it garnered good reviews. It was selected for other colleges for their common readings. But then Brooklyn College selected it this year for their freshman common reading, and suddenly there was the right-wing blogosphere lit up with acrimony against the decision, claiming that the book was going to indoctrinate students to a pro-Islam, anti-American point of view, purely ideological kind of attacks on a book that they clearly hadn't read. I was surprised and shocked by the phenomenon, and continue to be so, and actually feel that it's part of this moment that we're living in. Clearly, I don't recognize myself or my book in the discussions, so it seems that it's almost that it's entirely too easy just to take anything that has anything Muslim sounding to it, and to banish it away into controversy.
And finally, Tariq Ramadan, I know you have to leave, but in the United States, I'm sure you've heard the polls saying 20% of people think President Obama is a Muslim. And among the Republicans, I think it's up to somewhere near 50%. Your thoughts on this? No,
I think it's just reflecting the situation in the United States of America. And by the way, in fact, in all Western societies, we have exactly the same problems in Europe and in the States now. The atmosphere is very bad about just being a Muslim. So when we mistrust, there is this mistrust towards the president. Oh, he's a Muslim, a crypto-Muslim. I think that he's not a Muslim, we should say it. He is now asking the American society to just abide by its very values, which is freedom of religion. And this is what we have to say. So the Muslims should be clear on this. And it just reflects the situation in the country where there is a wave of, anti-Muslim perception and sometimes racism. It's built on ignorance, but also political forces using all these issues and controversies to build on it. And I think that the Muslims should really be aware from within. They belong to this country, they fight and struggle for their rights, but they are also dealing with sensitivities, and they should be show some kind of intellectual empathy, struggling, but at the same time understanding.
And if you were Imam Rauf right now, Professor Ramadan, what if you were Imam Rauf right now, the person who is spearheading the Park 51 project, what step would you take now?
I think that I will just take something which is to consult the community. I think that it was a project on his own. He was going ahead and supported by the State Department, supported by other religious communities, and there is a lack of internal communication. I think that this is where the problem started.
Tariq Ramadan, I want to thank you very much for being with us, professor at Oxford University. Mustafa Bayoumi, your final comments. Also, something interesting here is you begin your book, How Does It Feel to Be a Problem, talking about an infiltrator among a group of friends. And I would think right now the FBI is deeply concerned because, unfortunately, it has used mosques around the United States as places to infiltrate, to gather friends around it, to talk about what is going on. And now, with mosques under siege, there might be some very complicated feelings at the FBI. Could you talk about how you begin your book?
Sure. I talk in the beginning of my book about a young man, talking to a young man who had a friend who was an informant for the police and the FBI for one of the terrorism trials, and how that had began a whole feeling of mistrust for him and for a lot of his friends, and he had to know exactly who to trust and who not to trust after that. And I think what happens in times like this is that feelings of suspicion and trust are elevated to enormous degrees. And that comes through, I think, in some of the other stories in the book as well. But what is most important, it seems to me, out of that is a deep desire to actually get to know one another more clearly, more understand each other more deeply. And my book itself is actually 7 stories of 7 young Arab Americans and their lives after September 11th. And it's really an attempt to try to empathize with their situation. And I feel, if I may return to the controversy surrounding my book, that in fact may be a threat to some people out there today. The idea that you could actually empathize with the difficulties that young Arab Americans would have today, it seems like it itself is somehow threatening to the outside forces. And at the same time, it also seems to me that empathy is perhaps the most important political emotion that we could have today.
And importantly, the president of Brooklyn College has stood behind you in keeping your book as a common reading for the students.
That's right. And in fact, the events went forward. The students have read the book. There wasn't a single complaint from a student surrounding the book and its choice and its selection as the common reading. I've received only good comments from students about the book. So this, again, seems to be a controversy that was begun from outside and fomented from outside.
Mustafa Bayoumi, thanks so much for coming back, author of How Does It Feel to Be a Problem, Being Young and Arab in America, and his latest book, just coming out, is called Midnight on the Mavi Marmara, The Attack on the Gaza Freedom Flotilla, and how it changed the course of the Israel-Palestine conflict. We'll have you back to talk about that.